I'll start off here. This is just some notes I wrote as we were watching. Just Jakin is in his clouds, in his thoughts of the clouds. I wrote here. This film makes me wonder the perspective of somebody who's in a country that lost a war that was inflicted directly by it domestically. To look at a perspective that isn't American, of course, a perspective that is, for the lack of a better term, foreign to me. This film shows us light and hope in a very somber time and provides a very rich portrayal of life while living through an extremely dark time, not only for the world, but especially for Japan. Yeah, it made me think of the thought process and the people reacting to Japan losing in World War II. I think in Grave of the Fireflies coming up here, one of the characters describes it as the Great Empire of Japan back in the day. And I thought that was quite interesting. And the fact that not a lot, but there are definitely quite a few people that are still alive who grew up through that. And it's really interesting and fascinating. I know we have people, who are World War II veterans still, but they're they're thinning out, for lack of a better term. And there's a lot of wisdom we can pull from that. And I don't know, it just made me think. What do you think of any of that or anything at all?
Yeah, that actually reminds me of one of the moments in the film that I thought was kind of cool, because like Suzu, the main character in this movie, is very
naive, maybe.
No. I don't want to say plucky.
Okay.
But it's kind of like that, but less. She's not in like a weird off-putting way, like she still has like ups and downs, but overall she's kind of plucky and courageous, and she makes the best of life, of the challenges that life throws at her. And then, so it's really interesting. She has this sort of moment when I believe the Emperor of Japan himself actually comes on the radio to announce Japan's surrender in World War II. And she has a breakdown over that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting how like this sort of like, because most of the time when you think of war, you think of
the battles that are happening.
You think of like the motivations behind the war being disconnected from the concerns of the general populace. And that kind of comes with growing up in America and just hearing about all these wars that our country is involved with overseas for reasons that are either unknown to us or just have nothing to do with what we as citizens of the country necessarily want or desire, So, but in this case, in this particular situation, Suzu had kind of internalized some of that sort of nationalistic fervor to help keep her going, basically. Like all the food shortages, the bombings, everything that she had to endure. Part of what kept her going was the idea that she was doing her part to help, that she was doing her part in a larger war effort, and that Japan would eventually prevail, or at least it would never surrender, at least.
Yeah.
And so when the bombs dropped and Japan surrenders, she has sort of a breaking moment where that sort of, where that sort of nationalistic pride can no longer sustain her. And it's kind of a cool little piece of character development.
Yeah, I agree. I think it made me think about that kind of perspective of being in, because America's lost wars before, but I wasn't, at least I don't think I'm alive for any of them, really. But it's, and you bringing that up, I think, is a good point to make about this nationalistic connection here. Because I bet if America lost, we would basically act the same way, like, whoa, we lost? What's going on? I thought we were on top of things, or I think we had a chance, And it seems like she's in that same mindset too. And of course, you love your country and you want to succeed. And also, depending on the culture, how families and the greater social connections operate, yeah, there is a big sense, especially back in the day. Like nowadays, there's so much that distracts us. There's more and more that we could care less about, especially when it comes to politics or stuff that affects our borders or whatever. But to look at it from that perspective in this film made it really stand out to me. And it made me think about, man, what if we lost World War II in America, Or what if you were over in the UK and Germany just wiped you guys out? You were the last ones going for you, Or in the Middle East, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff over there where death and destruction, and there has been death and destruction, and the reality of it, especially in the mindset, especially from the perspective of like, she's not a kid, but you see it especially in Grave of the Fireflies, what it has effect on children and the dark side of all that and the pain and just the harsh environment, and to see that kind of reaction in that moment when the Emperor announces they lose, spoiler alert, it's in history, but to see that it really stood out to me. So, and yeah, the whole time she's like working hard and she, during the night raid, she gets up and she proclaims the message they hear on the radio, like, make sure your sliding doors are taken off and the fires are put out. And then you get to the shelter and all this kind of stuff. She's really on top of things and she's protecting her family. But then to see that it was all for naught in that moment, at least, is really sobering to see. And even in an animated form, which could be even more effective than live action. So there's a funny part, though, even though we talk about, World War II and the tragedies of there's some funny humor sprinkled throughout all of these situations. Like like I mentioned, proclaiming all of the procedures to be safe during an air raid. But also there's the part of the film where after the first air raid in 1945 hits, they make you think the father-in-law died by showing a shot of them crying over his his mat. And like, he's obviously laying there and then they're crying. And then you see the camera pan and and the dad's totally fine. He just slept through the air raid and they're like crying and thankful that he's okay. It's like, what the heck? So a little bait and switch there, which was very cute. And that kind of humor is really appreciated because of such, what's coming. Hiroshima's going to get bombed. Her family's over there, and she's in I think Kobe. That's the name of the city. Kure, thank you. And yeah, it's just, it's much appreciated throughout a very dark subject.